Hello my friends and welcome, just a hiking vlog from me. I hope that the sound is being recorded okay on this camera. So today I decided to tell my internal feelings about the current war in Ukraine and how it might develop in a nearby future or in the coming years. Well, today I read the news and put in comments about this so-called peace deal after the meeting with Vitkov. Vitkov is already in the United States of America. Well, Putin today said that no matter what, we're gonna liberate, he mentioned, not just Donbass, but entire Novorossiya. Well, Novorossiya is so-called, as Russia says, historical term, which exists just in the sick heads of the Russian officials, Russian propaganda, and Putin himself. They draw absolutely different maps describing what is Novorossiya. Some regions include Kharkiv, some regions include Dnipro city, and so on. But no one knows what is Novorossiya. So Putin basically openly says that we're gonna continue the war until we capture at least half of Ukraine. Maybe the idea for Putin is definitely like that. He wants to annex half of the Ukrainian territories connected to Russia, create some sort of the Novorossiya Republic, and the rest of the Ukraine, starting from Kiev and more to the west, should be like Belarus, some sort of the pro-Russian republic with a puppet government. That is what he declared today, and he said also that they do not agree for some of the points which were presented to them by Americans, which tells a lot. Plan completely failed. Yesterday I watched what Donald Trump mentioned at his conference. He was asked the question about Ukraine, and where he stated that the meeting was good, it was fine. Vitkov and Kushner, they believe that Putin wants peace. Then if you listen to Putin himself, he doesn't want peace even closer, and he tells about it at every freaking press conference, every of his interviews. He is saying about war, and only war. Then he threatens Europe. Also, we are not going to attack Europe, but if Europe attacks us, we're gonna use the mighty force, because in Ukraine we work like surgeons, very precisely. But for Europe, we're gonna, there will be no one to even communicate with after we start some sort of the big escalation. He also mentioned that Russians could cut Ukraine from the Black Sea because Ukraine started to target Russian tankers and other ships in the Black Sea. Well, good luck with that. If Russian army was capable to do it, they would do it long time ago, yes. But no, they're not that capable, at least against Ukraine. But as for Europe, there are also huge risks, absolute tremendous risks. And it's very pity that the White House doesn't understand that. Today also read the news that the Bild, I guess, published, or maybe Spiegel, I think it's Spiegel, that they published the information about internal communications between Macron and Chancellor Merz, where they said and came to conclusion that definitely Europe and Ukraine were betrayed by Americans and that Zelensky should be very careful about the peace deal. And it didn't work. This peace deal, it didn't work for Russians, it didn't work for Americans, and we have what we have or had before since 2022. The same Russian demands. Ukraine continued to defend its sovereignty. Basically, people are dying, and Russia took some of the territories. But even if we compare the current situation to what was happening in the spring of 2022, then Ukraine definitely lost lots of the territories. Well, now Ukraine controls more of the ground, and Russia still, it cannot conquer Kharkiv, it cannot conquer Sumy, Zaporizhia. It's actually a very, very long story for Russians to reach their goals of the special military operation. And for Donbass, they could fight for 2 years. So my prediction that for Zaporizhia, Russians may advance quite fast the next year, probably. I'm not saying that they will capture Zaporizhia, but at the end of the next year, the fights could be already very close to Zaporizhia, that's the main city. Also, Russians will expand their territorial gains in Donbass. Unfortunately, yes, they may take Konstantinovka the next year, finally Chasiv Yar, maybe some other cities and towns, like for example Kupiansk. Recently Ukraine started the counteroffensive there, but still, like in a long-term perspective, Russia has advantage. They have more military resources, they will have it. And Ukraine doesn't have lots of the resources compared to Russia. Now our European partners are unable to compensate everything, and even via Pearl program it's not working as it could be. So I wouldn't say that the situation for Ukraine is like very bright, but as I continue to tell you, Ukraine has two of the choices. One is stop defending and fall into Russian hands. The second one is to continue fight, and while fighting, unfortunately, there will be losses for Ukraine. And those are just two of the choices for Ukraine existing. No peace deals are optional. Even if Ukraine agreed on a peace deal together with Russia, Russia would just occupy Donetsk and would go further, taking more territories. As I said to you, it's not just about Donbass. Putin is already saying about Novorossiya, and in general he is saying about the occupation of entire Ukraine, at least applying his puppet government, because he says that the government, Ukrainian government, is not a legitimate one, which now rules Ukraine. He calls it junta, and that there was a military coup and everything like that. So we have this issue with external help and with Brussels, this Brussels prime minister who say that Russia will not lose in any case, so they will take their money from our banks anyway, so it's better not to confiscate those. That's what their prime minister stated yesterday, actually. So aggressor state should receive its money for continuation of the war, or what? Like, they're totally delusional. They should have confiscated all of the Russian assets and spent those for Ukraine, but they're doing nothing. I mean, it's not just about Belgium, it's about European Union, which is sleeping because they're not searching for solutions to confiscate those assets already for almost 4 years. They're out there frozen, and now they start to think about it. Okay. So Ukraine obtains this support little by little, which eventually may lead, I won't say to the complete collapse of the front lines, but it may lead to the Russian breakthrough, which might happen not the next year, but in 2027. I think Russians finally might occupy Donbass. They might take even Zaporizhia, creating the bridgehead on the other side of Dnipro River, on the right bank of Dnipro. That bridgehead is a threat for entire Europe, because Dnipro River is the huge natural obstacle. Even in the Second World War, Dnipro River played a great role, especially for German defense. The Soviets were the occupying regions of Ukraine. There were tremendous losses not far away from Kiev, in Lutish. It was very difficult to cross it. But Russians might do it in Zaporizhia, for example. And with that bridgehead, they might advance further and further, attacking Ukrainian army group from the south, advancing behind the river, bypassing natural obstacle. So this could be a decisive factor of this war, and we see the ambitions of Russia, why they connected in their constitution Kherson and Zaporizhia, because Kherson is behind the river and Zaporizhia is also behind the river, so they proclaim that they want to have those bridgeheads to threaten Ukraine and Eastern Europe entirely. Well, I don't think that the next year exactly they're gonna reach those goals, but in 2027, if everything stays the same as it goes, I mean, for limited Ukrainian military support and for Ukrainian army men resources, Ukraine cannot sustain it. And Zelensky also said it in his address to our European colleagues that of course we are fighting, our army is defending Ukraine and Europe, but we are not forever there's still a limit. We are humans, he said, after all. So Ukraine cannot continue to defend even the eastern front lines for years and years. But that's the idea for Russia and for Putin, to make it exhausting war for Ukraine and to somehow push it finally for Ukraine to basically surrender its territories and to break through to the open field environment and continue the straightforward movement to even Kiev, Odessa, and so on. Well, I don't think that in the coming years it is really possible for Russia to achieve that success. But they'll expedite the territorial gains, it's 100%. We're gonna see it even the next year, that Russia will, again, I'm not calling it a breakthrough, but they will gain more and more territories, way more than they took this year or the previous one. Yeah, unfortunately, this simple mathematics for resources, it's not playing in favor of Ukraine, and Russia, the next year, they will be capable to continue the war in 2027 as well. Their economy will be in stagnation or stagflation, but they will not crush in the coming years, unfortunately, for Ukraine. I see that Ukraine obtained some of the boost in the PURO program, but again, it's not enough. Russia invested into its military $164 billion. That's the project for the budget. They will reach it 100%. It's the number one priority for Putin to maintain its military. So to conquer that, Ukraine needs the same sum, but Ukraine doesn't have even closer to that kind of the budget. Well, the good thing that Ukraine is in defense, so Ukraine, from the military perspective, is using less resources compared to Russia. So Ukraine has less losses compared to Russia, and it requires less of everything for defense. That's why the strategy of Ukraine is not to counterattack somewhere, but to continue to defend the territories, losing them little by little, exchanging for time. Time for Ukraine is crucial. That's the only strategy possible for in the current scenario for defending Ukraine. Ukraine is big, after all, that's also other plus, but Ukrainian army, again, it is not infinite. And also there is an internal crisis in Ukraine, I mean, with this scandal around corruption, and not only basically Ukrainian military command is not competent and everyone sees it, so Ukraine requires army reforms, and our volunteers, our officers, they're screaming about it, but I don't see any sort of the steps done to that, like very solid steps. Yeah, there's some talking ongoing, also President Zelensky says about it, but like firm steps. Okay, we're gonna start reforms, we're gonna rank up talented commanders and officers, and incompetent Soviet school commanders we're gonna dismiss together with Syrsky. But it's not happening, and I see, and everyone sees, that Ukraine goes and does the same mistakes again and again and again, and the battlefield, it's not staying, it's evolving. You see drones, they have longer range. Russia is also learning on its own mistakes, and I would say Russia learns way better, unfortunately, compared to Ukraine. I see new technologies are being introduced in Russia. They have now very capable drone units which are hunting our drone units behind the front lines. They increase the range for their drones, fiber optics and everything. So not just from the technological perspective they're advancing, but also from the army regulation and army reforms, which are actually happening in Russia, whether we like it or not. Putin dismissed many of the Russian generals whom he didn't like. Corruption is still out there in the Russian army, but now Russian generals, they afraid of the system, afraid of Putin, so they take from the budget less money than before, and that is not playing the good role for Ukraine. Well, still the Russian command is, I would say, not that competent, with Gerasimov in charge, which is good for Ukraine, but in general I may say that Russia, unfortunately, it is improving. It's still struggling on the front lines. You see Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, and they're taking those two towns for how much time? For 1 year with something, and the active battle in those towns is ongoing for several months already. I was almost sure that Russia could occupy those cities maybe 2 weeks ago, but still they're out there, unable to advance firmly. And Putin is telling that they are winning just on TV, that Russia occupied Kupiansk, Russia encircled thousands of Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk, Mirnograd. But it's all fake. However, we see that Russia has advantage. Not as much as Putin says in his command, but they have. And the big question goes for the big war in Europe, because from every sort of the influencer, every sort of the expert, every sort of the media, it is already understandable that that thing is inevitable, that it is coming. And not long time ago here it was even a referendum, should women join army because it could be necessary, Here it's even like that. In Netherlands, people obtain some sort of the papers of how to behave in case of the war or some of the nuclear disaster. So it is damn serious. Many of the European countries' intelligence services, they're warning about the war between Russia and Europe. So Russia may start this war very, very soon. Judging on what Putin is saying, it's also kind of frightening. So I think that it might happen. And to avoid it, like, Europe should wake up. Finally, Europe especially, because for America it will be sleeping till probably the next United States president, next White House administration, and potentially they might help Europe in that case. But for the next 3 years, no, it's only up to Europe to defend itself and to help Ukraine, because Ukraine is the only force which is capable to hold the vast part of the Russian army on its own territory. Ukraine is like this shield nowadays, defending Europe against the possible Russian intervention. And do you think that United States, they care about the future of Baltic countries, of Poland? Maybe, but they will not deploy their forces, of course, to protect those. It's 100% under Donald Trump. That's why Putin has this window to attack European countries during the next 3 years. So next 3 years we should expect something big to happen. Some sort of the casus belli also could happen, like today Medvedev also wrote on his Twitter that if Europe confiscates Russian assets, frozen assets, it's gonna be a casus belli to start the war. You see it, everyone is talking about it. Russians, Europeans, it's gonna happen, my friends, if nothing significantly changes on the way. And coming back to Ukraine with its actual fight, what is happening, without reforms, Ukraine will continue to lose territories. That's it. I mean, army reforms, and without military support, proper support, with the problems Ukraine has in government and in military, because you see corruption scandal, and it seems like Yermak is dismissed. Some people also dismissed, some left the country, some of the prosecution activity, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's not yet even the start of digging down into the problem. The problem may touch every sort of the sphere of Ukraine, including military, including President Zelensky himself. Hopefully he's not involved directly into corruption, but I think he knew about everything of that because all of his friends were involved in those schemes, and this is terrible, this is miserable, this is ugly, this is shame. But unfortunately it is happening. So without reforms in government structure, army, Ukraine will lose way more territories than previous years. That's my, unfortunately, forecast for the coming year and for maybe 2027 as well. So no changes. And Trump will continue to push mostly Ukraine for some sort of the Russian peace deals or for something, telling that Ukraine doesn't have any cards or some bullshit like that. And Russia, unfortunately, will continue its strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure and continue to propel on the front lines. Unfortunately, there is no other choice. Even if Ukraine had accepted that 28 original Russian demand peace plan, also nothing would change. Even in that case, Russia would just continue fight. They would occupy Donbass without any fight, but later on they will continue. That's it. That's the goal of Russian Empire as it is right now under Putin's Tsar, barbarian country, absolutely, and their behavior towards Ukrainians is unhinged. But as I already hinted you in this video, Ukraine doesn't only have external enemy, it has internal enemy, the government itself, freaking corrupt government. And luckily there are some of the changes, but those are not enough absolutely for Ukraine to finally change the situation on the front lines. And yeah, we're still thankful for our European partners, mostly now European partners, who help Ukraine with some weapons, air defense systems and so on. So at least like that, at least Ukraine is capable to defend itself, losing territories, but still capable. Well, lots of the stuff in this video I already mentioned on my main channel. Just want to conclude, what I think, my thoughts after all of this peace deal drama and meetings between Vitkov, Ukrainian delegation, Vitkov, Kushner, Russia, Putin. I combined everything and I just give you my own outcome, what I think about the situation in general for the last months. Yeah, the last month was really crazy for events around Ukraine. We'll see how it goes next. I also hope for Black Swan. Black Swan, where are you? Prigozhin 2, where are you? So it could be changed. All of the forecasts and all of the predictions are invalid sometimes because of some of the event that no one expects, but it might happen, as we already knew from the history of this war that lasts for almost 4 years, which is crazy. Okay guys, so what I want to say today, hope you enjoyed this video, just my hiking podcast. Can I call it a podcast? Just blah blah blah. Alright guys, see you around, ciao.